You are listening to the Smart Betting Club podcast with me, your host, Peter Ling. Now, this podcast is sponsored by the Matchbook Betting Exchange, and you can find out more on what they offer smart bettors over at matchbook.com. And if you are interested in learning more what it takes to make a profit betting, please do check out my service for winning bettors over at smartbettingclub.com. Hello and welcome to the Smart Betting Club podcast. This is episode 80. And today, in something of a US election betting special, I'm delighted to be joined by a political betting guru, Zeus O'Dea. Zeus, it's great to have you on, mate. I know you're a very busy man at the moment and you're also travelling around. Whereabouts are you currently?
I'm not sure about busy, mate. For me, every day is a holiday. But currently I'm in Montenegro. And first of all, I wanted to say thank you very much for having me on. I've listened for quite a while. I'm a big fan. So a bit of a treat to finally be on the other side of this.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you because we're recording this, 15 days away from the US election, the biggest betting market ever. So many things to get into. But first of all, I'm intrigued about why you're in Montenegro. I believe there's some kind of story behind it.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I was in London for 2 years, basically. And London was, you kind of get to a point, any place you go, where it just sort of gets a bit much after a while. And look, I've got a lot of friends in London, nothing against it, but I wanted to try something new. And so I kind of just did one of these things where I just looked at the least travelled places in Europe, and Montenegro was one of them. And I've got a colleague that's from here, and I was just like, okay, well, let's try that. And it's been good fun. The only issue is, though, that this country, a lot of the times, they don't have card facilities. So, they only take cash, right, which is fine. For the normal person, you have, credit cards, you can put them into an ATM and withdraw cash. And, here's me explaining how, ATMs work. But effectively what happened probably about 2 weeks ago was I went down to a beach, bit of an after party on my day off, and effectively went swimming in the Adriatic, and I lost my card, which is obviously not ideal, right? And so after this, I'm trying to look for, I'm just trying to think to myself, how do I get cash? There's no Western Unions in Montenegro.
Yeah.
Trying to get cash. Eventually what I do, right, and I say this as I'm a bit of a crypto virgin, to put it lightly, right? And eventually what I do is I finally find this guy that takes crypto, converts it to cash. So set up a covert meeting, get in the car, right, and he's just like, hey, bro, what network are you with? And here's me thinking, if you're in crypto, you think, oh, okay, Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever. But
yeah,
I was like, oh, I thought mobile network. And I'm sitting there, oh, bro, I'm with MTEL. And he sits and looks at me, no, bro, crypto network. So anyway, that finally got there. But it's been a great country. It's been a great time being here. I've loved Montenegro a lot of really good old towns and stuff. My family's from Croatia, so can't complain. It's been great. And I'm ready to crack into the election.
Yeah, good stuff. So you found a place to hold up for a few weeks, and yeah, the Adriatic. Is it Adriatic around there, Montenegro? I've heard some encouraging stories.
It is. It's just south of Croatia. Yeah, above Albania.
Very nice. Yeah, but obviously from your accent, you're not from England either. Obviously, we've got Australian. And interesting about your background, because we'll get into where you work and shuffle. But tell us how you got into the betting world. Your background as a punter and now working in bookmaking.
Look, man, I'll make this one short because I always kind of hate listening to people's backgrounds when I'm on listening to gambling podcasts. I'm like, mate, I literally don't care, how you got your first fucking million or so. I just want to know how you gamble. Effectively, I just started, I kind of was always into it, did maths as a kid, found I was pretty good at it, found a niche, and then effectively just kind of 3 years ago went full-time, was full-time for 2.5 years. Still bet now, obviously, but I have another job as well. Bet politics, cricket, bit of tennis, bit of anything really. You make contacts.
Okay, great. So obviously big punter, big into betting, big into maths, all that kind of stuff that we associate with anybody that comes on my podcast usually.
Correct.
But then what you're doing now is very different. Well, the role, because I've never had someone who works for effectively what's a crypto bookmaker in Shuffle. How did that role, how did you get that role? What's it look like? What do you currently do there?
Oh, look, mate, it's completely by chance, to be honest with you. I was in Japan. My father works in Japan, and I was visiting him, staying at his apartment in Tokyo earlier in the year. And, I missed London at the time. I was looking to go back. And then, look, I'm friends with the head trader. I don't know if he wants to be named, so I won't name him. If you know, you kind of know, it's going to be obvious. But he DM'd me, and we've known each other, I wouldn't say professionally, but we've known each other for a while. And he's like, look, we're looking to hire another sports trader. at Shuffle, and I'd never heard of it before. But we want to hire them in the European time zone. I saw you talking about wanting to return to London. Are you keen? And I said, look, yeah, like I'd love to. Let's try to work something out. Great company. Talk to the CEO. Great guy. Very switched on. And the same as the head trader and head of sports. And so that kind of came about. And I'm just a sports trader, just a humble minion. But like I said, it's a great company. They've hired a lot of really, really good people. It's no wonder that it's doing the numbers that it is.
Yeah, because I was doing some reading about it a couple of months back, and I was impressed by, even though I hadn't heard of it previously, actually, until I met you, actually, and you told me about it, the amount of people that are better, how much amount of money that's getting traded through Shuffle. I know you said there you're not, you don't know a great deal about crypto, but the people that Shuffle attracts do. Is it a much younger audience, or is it for people who want to bet at larger stakes than maybe traditional regulated bookmakers might allow?
Well, talking about stakes, what I will say is that, like I mentioned before, our trading team's pretty world class, led by the guy who hired me, who's very well respected in the industry. And what he's done is, I know a lot of bookmakers generally, they've hired people that, might be straight out of uni, might be, good at maths, but they don't know how to bet. They don't know how to profile people.
Yeah.
And what he's done is he's hired a team of people that are professional bettors. So we're able to profile people really effectively. We're able to take, I would say, higher than average bets than our competitors for the size that we are. And it just allows us to be way more efficient. And in terms of, people might be asking, how are we different, for example, and then say, there's a lot of competitors. There's Rollbit, there's BC Game, there's Monkey Tilt, there's Stake. Stake's the biggest one.
Yeah.
Our training team, we're able, like I said, the people that they've hired across the whole organisation, the marketing team, we're able to be a lot more nimble. The VIP program, like for example, we're all in the chats and we have a really good relationship, and I really think that we're going to be something special.
It calls back to mind, like when I've had guests on the past and they've talked about working in trading rooms back in the early 2000s, where they cut their teeth, and a lot of the people that I've had on the podcast learned, and they got to know each other by working. They were all punters, they bet. They never bet on anything. The next person to walk through the door, what colour socks someone's going to be wearing. Everything would be a bet, and they lived and breathed it. Whereas if you look at modern trading rooms, that element has gone out of the window. So Shuffle's bringing that back in a way.
I don't know whether it's a conscious decision. I mean, to me, I think it is a conscious decision by him, and a very smart one by a head of trading. But yeah, like all of us, like I said, have different expertise. Like one of my colleagues, there's four of us. One of my colleagues bets MMA professionally or combat sports. One of us bets horse racing. And, you obviously have me who bets on anything, mate, that moves. So if I have an edge, I'm betting it, so.
Before we get into the US, because I know you do a lot of political betting, we're going to get into a lot of that today. One of the markets you did put up was a hurricane that hit in Florida recently. Now, it wasn't about total deaths or anything like that. I know that's not on the radar, but it was things like, was it like wind speed and what time it would hit landfall? Do you get much interest in these markets, or are they just to generate, like a bit of publicity?
Well, yeah, look, to reiterate straight away, I know this is quite controversial. Every market that I put up was related to strictly meteorological. So it was wind speed, it was storm surge, and it was a time that the hurricane would hit Florida. And look, what happened after that is it wouldn't affect those markets, right? And I thought that, hey, people might want to bet on this, because I remember that when COVID happened, I don't know whether it was the same in England, but a lot of sports were suspended.
Yep.
So there were no sports. Bookmakers were like, fucking, okay, like, we got shareholders to please. What markets are we going to put up, right? And what they did is they put up like markets like at 12 p.m. tomorrow, what temperature is Adelaide going to be? And it'd be like under or over 15.5 degrees or something, right? And I remember building this it was a very rudimentary thing in Excel, and I managed to beat it, but it was probably the most fun I've had betting in my entire life, to be completely honest. And then after Hurricane Milton, the markets we put up, we got a lot of interest on it. And I was like, why don't we just give this a go? Like, I mean, I feel like people might want to bet on real life events, and that might be anything from, over under 6 months until I get a girlfriend, or it might be like the temperature in Baghdad in 6 days. But like I said, I posted this on Twitter. If people have a market that they want to bet on in real life, as long as it's not death or illness related or anything like that, I find those quite unsavory. I don't want to price them up for obvious reasons. Morally, I'm happy to price that up for people. So that's fun about bookmaking. So that's kind of the whole top and tail of it.
There you go. I'm sure there's a few people listening to this who would think, oh, I've got a market. I remember, as you were talking there, Luke Payton, I don't know if you know Luke, but he's quite a prominent Twitter user. And I think he wanted to do a weight loss bet as a bit of a motivation. You know, how many kilos can I lose?
Well, mate, that is exactly the type of thing that I would be willing to price up, to be honest, with somebody. So if Luke, if you're listening and you're in a country, this is very important, that's, legally able to bet on Shuffle, create an account, then hit me up on Twitter and Zeus O'Dea.
There you go. Okay, well, and anyone else who's got any interest in some funky markets, because that's what you do.
I was going to say, I priced up. One of my friends hit me up overseas and was like, "Hey, I've got a mate in the playing in the Gold Coast Div 5 cricket league. Can you price his runs lineup?" So I said, "Yeah, of course, let's do it." And I was looking at the ball by ball coverage, and I mean stuff like that. Honestly, that's just pure fun. That is the most fun that you can have as a bookmaker is doing that. Look, don't get me wrong, it's a good job, but I'm not sitting here thinking about, God, the Baltimore Ravens tonight. Like, that's actually using your head doing this kind of stuff. So, and that's the same reason I like politics, to be honest. Same thing, intellectually challenging.
Nice segue there, because that's the next topic, political betting. Are you in charge of political betting at Shuffle, or is that your remit then, Matt, or as you work with a team?
We're all part of a team and we all have input into these things, but we all have specialties as well. And when I was hired, they were very well aware, and probably one of the reasons I was hired was that because I have an interest in politics, I'm quite good at politics. And so, yeah, generally I'm running the politics kind of, I don't want to say department. It's, like me and a dog per department, but I'm generally in charge of the pricing, yes.
And then tell me, I mean, it's obviously framed as a huge betting market, perhaps the biggest ever. How much are you seeing activity-wise at Shuffle? There's a lot of interest there. And, could you talk me through like kind of size bets that you're able to take on the market?
For obvious reasons, like I can't talk exact amounts, but what I will say is that the largest bet that we've taken in terms of stakes so far would be in the low six figures, US dollars. The biggest amount that we've bet to lose so far, I would say, would be, I believe it's low mid six figures. Someone bets Kamala Harris when she was back before Biden dropped out, and I was happy to lay at that point, and maybe that was an oversight of mine, but so we're on the hook for that. Look, what I'll say for politics is a lot of times this doesn't apply to people like NFL or whatever. People are like, like I can't guarantee to lay. I will guarantee to lay. There are about 5 people in the world that I would not want to lay politics to. And if you're one of those 5 people, you know who you are. But everyone else, I'm more than happy to lay a lot of money for literally whatever you want. Like, you want to come to me and say, I want to bet on X congressional district, I would back myself to beat you. And I'm happy to put that out there publicly.
But I want to get into those 5 people and who they are in a minute. You're happy to take positions?
I couldn't tell you that. I couldn't tell you that, but they would know who they are.
Okay. But in terms of your own trading, you're happy to take a position to push something out, take a risk, and you're encouraged to do that, I guess, by the team you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Donald Trump, when Biden dropped out earlier this year, I was pushing Donald Trump above Betfair for a while because I wanted to take bets on him.
Yeah.
I didn't want to lay Kamala. Of course, at the time, the problem is that no one wants to bet Kamala. But if I think I'm on the right price, I'm happy to. I did it with senatorial markets, gubernatorial markets. A lot of those will come up in the next week or so, but I'm happy to back myself against the market when it comes to these.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not to say, I'm the supreme king, like I'm Billy Big Bollocks over here. But, I mean, I think I have a decent edge on politics and, I was employed to trade it and trade it I will.
So in terms of what you're looking at, we're 15 days out. This will probably go out a few days after this recording. What's the best and worst result for you currently? Is it Trump or is it Harris?
Oh, it's a big time worst result is Trump. But, I mean, I would be very, very surprised if that wasn't the case for most books around the world.
Trump's the worst result for you, not Harris.
Yeah. Even though we took that bet on Harris, that kind of shows you the volume of money that Trump gets. And look, I only anticipate the volume to get higher and higher. Politics is one of those things that people will wake up on the day of the election and think, oh, it's the US election. And they'll go and place money on it, right? Like, to do the volume that we've done so far, that's only going to get higher. And what I'm trying to do right now is we're trying to figure out how to best to live trade the election and whether we can do that. And if we can do that, I'd love to do it. That would be awesome. But yeah, right now our best result still is Kamala.
Yeah, well, live trading, obviously, I remember 2020 and the trading, the odds over the course of the day of subsequent months, actually. But actually, that 24, 48 hour period, The volatility in that market was huge, wasn't it? I think I went to bed and Trump was 1.25, and then he was, went out above evens after that. A few hours later, as the votes came in from the mail-in ballots and they were counted. So it's certainly from a volume perspective, I imagine there's quite a lot from the live and post. And in terms of settlement, is that something you've had to consider? How have you worked that out? Because I know it was a nightmare for so many companies last time out with what happened post 2020. How have you approached that?
In terms of settlement, I want to make it really simple, and it's just whatever the electoral votes are on the night, like in terms of whatever the declared electoral votes are, that is how we're going to settle it. So, if Donald Trump ends up winning on, say, Wednesday after, that's how we'll settle it, when a few networks have declared it. If Kamala ends up winning by 4 electoral votes, that's how we're going to settle it. We're not in the business of trying to, pardon my French, fuck people around.
Yeah.
People have bet on, say, for example, Kamala. If Kamala wins, they expect to be paid.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not entertaining conspiracy theories about ballot harvesting and all this stuff. If Kamala wins, that's good enough for me. And if Trump wins, that's also good enough for me.
Yeah. Just thinking back to 2020, each firm had a different approach to it. And I think since then, they've obviously looked at it and gone, what happens if we're on the hook for all this money? I know there was class lawsuits against Betfair, the way they settled it in the end.
There was.
So it will run and run.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane to me, to be honest.
Yeah. In terms of, there's a lot more money. There's obviously more bookmakers involved these days. You've got yourselves, you've got lots of like Polymarkets and all these different platforms encouraging political betting. But is it, in terms of the types of people and the way the markets are being approached, is it similar to what the patterns you've seen in previous elections, or is this a whole new ball game in 2024?
I can't say that this market is really any different. In 2020, you'll remember that the market was famously stubborn on, not allowing the Biden price to be pushed down further than it was. And Trump has come in again in this election, and I'm sure we'll touch on exactly why later. But I said this, I was on the Deep Dive podcast earlier last week, and you're like, don't mention another podcast. That's strictly taboo.
I listened to that before this. That's fine. It was a good chat.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed my time on there. But it was brought up and I said, look, I don't want to totally discount this weight of money that's coming in, right? Like, I can say to myself, I have a price in my head. But when so much money is coming in, it kind of makes it difficult to, at some point you have to take the market into consideration. And you could say the same about 2020. And one of the things, I can't remember who said this at the time, but I remember reading some very smart guy. It might have been Matt Trenhale, actually. It might have been, now I think about it, but I'm not 100%. And he was talking about 2020, and he said, like, some of the biggest sharps in the world, even though they didn't think Trump was going to win, they thought it was a superb bet to bet Trump at price. I think it was 280 or something, just purely because of the asymmetrical nature of it, in that, any good news for Biden would barely move the market, and Trump, gains a point in the polls, and, the market acts like, it's just been jabbed up with Kabul's best heroin. Like, it's insane. As much as I can say, hey, look, that 2020 market was wrong, it was still reasonably close in the end. And people say as well, hey, Trump has beaten Hillary Clinton, run Biden close. Maybe there's something in that. Maybe it's not as easy as what you think to beat him. And throughout, the last 3 years, but particularly last year, I've been thinking, what happened on January 6th, like his general comments, blah, blah, blah. Kamala's going to win by a long way. And slowly I'm starting to think, okay, well, maybe is it actually that easy to beat him? And so you got to juggle these things. And I'm still pro Kamala, right? But I've had to reduce my winning percentage for her downwards as time has gone on, the closer we get to the election.
Because you've got to respect the market. You've got to respect that. Because what we've seen in recent days, I wanted to ask you, is a drift in Harris, a major push on Trump. And then there have been, let's get your take on it, like quite a few, there's interesting Twitter thread, I'm sure you've read it, people talking about a few high profile or high net worth individuals manipulating the odds or putting as much money down as possible. Maybe I think 4 accounts responsible for a large amount of volume. I'd be interested in your take on this. Is this something that you spent a lot of time looking into and thinking about?
I've read the same Twitter thread as you. I'm not really able to comment, and not because I'm not allowed to comment or I don't want to comment. It's just more that I don't want to speculate on who this is. Median result is it's some rich guy that just wants to bet Trump.
Yeah.
And it's a crypto guy, right wing, wants to bet Trump. Any odds, we'll just bet Trump. I would say that's the median kind of result of who that is. But again, you can kind of compare it to, like, people say that, the EPL is the most efficient market in the world. If someone came in with one and waded into the, 1x2 Betfair market for one of the EPL games, even like Liverpool, Chelsea, and waded in with 30 million, Tony Bloom might have a fair bit of money, but even he might not be able to totally correct that, right?
If you're thinking like, what does this person know that I don't?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, again, I'm willing to respect anyone that has that amount of money, but you also have to take into account that it literally just might be some rich guy. And that's why I said, like, I have to kind of take my price in a little bit and kind of think very hard about that. But in terms of who it is or what it is, I can't totally say.
No one will ultimately know, but it's how it impacts you from a pricing perspective, and where, if you want to push out the price on Trump a little bit, it might make you a little bit more wary to do so. I want to ask you then about polling. Is this something you check all the time? I know we'll talk about Nate Silver, but is it 538 website and all the different polling rankings and the different polls that come out? I guess you must pay some attention to it, but if a poll comes out and it has a slightly different result to what you're expecting, or you've seen some trends, is that going to impact how you're starting to price things up?
Like I said in the last pod I was on, polling is something that I can talk about for quite a while, and I will learn from the last time and try to keep it brief. But it's very dangerous to read into any one particular poll just purely because there is a margin of error on every single poll. And for people that aren't completely familiar with polling, that's totally okay. 95% of people are not. Say, for example, if a poll has Kamala over Trump, like 48 to 45, right? Or Trump over Kamala 51 to 48 or something like that. When you're contacting people, you can kind of make a statistical assumption to some extent. Say you go around your office and you survey 10 people and you say who's going to win the election. Mm-hmm. You could never say that sample is representative of the whole country, right? There's a huge margin of error there.
Yeah.
Now you say, for example, your office is 50 people, you go around and ask, okay, who's going to win the election? Right now, this sample, assuming you have, there's probably people of color, there's women, blah, 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 that sample is probably going to be a little bit more representative. But again, not a lot of people when you consider that the voting population is probably in the region of 170, 180 million, right? So again, huge margin of error there. Now you bump it up to 500. Okay, now you're starting to get a pretty decent sample. Still not perfect, but now the margin of error might be 4%. So what that means is if you're saying Kamala 48, Trump 45, that could be wrong by 4%. Either way is the important thing. So, and then if you go even further, say, for example, there are some polls released where they have 2,000 people polled. Now you're starting to get a pretty representative sample, and they do their own weighting. One of the reasons the polls missed by a little bit in 2016 was because they didn't weight properly for education, and you had a massive education divide in terms of people that went to college.
Yeah.
They were supporting the Democrats, and you had the people that didn't go to college that voted for Trump in overwhelming numbers, right? He got huge rural numbers, Trump, and that's one of the reasons that he won. And what they've tried to do now, polling, is they've tried to fix by waiting to 2020 recall vote, which means that, say, for example, they called you up, Pete, and they said, hey, Pete, how do you vote in the 2020 election? That's one of the questions. And you say, okay, I voted for Trump. Again, I'm completely making this up. Pete says, okay, I voted for Trump, and I'm planning on voting for Harris this year, right? So what they do is they weight their polling results to effectively the 2020 results to try and capture, because polls have missed on Democrats high 2 times, they want to try and fix this by capturing more Republican voters. So they weight to 2020 results. The issue with this is that if you wait to 2020 results, you capture the amount of voters that voted in 2020. And this is not to mention the fact that people can misremember. People can say they voted for one when they voted for another, and this affects results and blah, blah, blah. But what happens is then you've waited to 2020, but what you're now not doing is you're not capturing updated trends. You're not capturing what might be happening in 2024. And one of my theses has always been that Trump was already not popular in 2020. And then January 6th happened. Then all this stuff happens. He talks about poisoning the blood of the country. He talks about all these things like deporting 1 million people, like more than 1 million people. And like talks about tariffs that many economists have said are going to raise inflation. And Trump's anti-inflation, and it's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. And I don't want to come across as too anti-Trump. I'm just talking about these things that I've said. But what you're now doing is he already wasn't popular, and you add this stuff on it, and polls are now saying he's more popular. And, sometimes 2 + 2 = 4, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me qualitatively that he is as popular in polling as well as he is. And I could be wrong, but my instinct is generally that it's just a lot of people, I just don't understand where he's going to get enough votes to win. That's one of the reasons why I've Kamala ahead, and I might be proven wrong. But for me, that's kind of my general thesis.
There's a lot of nuance and impact and things to consider when it comes to the polling. Are there any particular key markers that people can look for? Is there anything that highlights that you look for? Or is it you just got to get into the detail on the polls and almost take polls of polls and look at the general consensus rather than just one or two outliers?
When you say detail, you mean specific markets or?
Well, like the quality of each poll, because I understand, the different polling companies, the quality of their polling technique, how they poll, maybe the weightings they put into it varies, and some have different caliber and you put more weight into them than others, perhaps. So you've got to do all of that detail to actually make an informed decision about how the polls might impact your approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at polling is sort of like an art in itself, to be honest. Like, for example, in 2022, in the midterms, there were a lot of really low quality polling, at least ahead of the election, that showed Republicans winning by a lot, right? But the really high quality polling, and if you want to know, or what's a high quality poll, okay, well, you can just go to 538 or any of these companies' websites, and they rank these things. They rank them based on, like how willing they are to share their data, like whether they're willing to share how they collect data. Certain methods of collecting data are more effective than others. But effectively, all the high quality polls were showing that 2022 was effectively like a bit of a dead heat. And yet the markets were showing anything. And you sort of wonder, okay, were the markets influenced by the polling, or did people just genuinely believe because obviously you have the midterm thing where the president's party will lose seats, right?
Yeah.
And so did people read into that? I don't know. But all I know is that, low quality polling was wrong, high quality polling was right. And this was after 2 presidential elections, 2016, 2020, where they went high on Democrats. Now, that probably says to me, okay, have they fixed the high quality polling? Have they fixed their issues? Again, this hasn't been tested in a presidential year so far, and this is where I can understand where people are saying, like, okay, well, Biden was up by X amount and only won by Y amount, which is less than X. Therefore, if Kamala is up by 1% in a bunch of swing states on average, she's going to get absolutely trucked. I'm not completely sure of that. I would prefer, my general thesis is I don't really want to assume anything about polling error. I'd rather take the polls at face value to an extent. But I can see why some people like Trump.
This podcast is sponsored by the Matchbook Betting Exchange. When it comes to betting exchanges, Matchbook has been my personal go-to for some time now. Using horse racing as an example, they've offered the best prices on the most runners this year, which can make a big difference to your bottom line. Plus, with an industry-leading score of 4.2 on Trustpilot, you know you're in safe hands. Download the Matchbook Betting Exchange app or go to matchbook.com today. And if you enter the code SBC150, that's SBC150 on sign up, you can get commission-free for your first 150 days, which can give you even more value. If you need to place a larger or more bespoke bet, or are indeed a corporate or operator client, their brokerage service is excellent and available 365 days a year. For more details, email the team at brokerage@matchbook.com. Matchbook Betting Exchange is for bettors who know better. From a punting perspective, people listening to go, well, I want to have a piece of this action. This sounds like there is potentially, though, from going into the detail, there is edges to be had. But that might not, again, be in just the presidential market, but obviously all the Senate markets, all the different derivative markets that spin out of this. There's likely edges to be had for somebody that does their research, like we saw in the UK election, in the different constituencies and different prop markets that pop up.
Yeah. And like I said, you sort of have to trust the weight of money to some extent in the actual presidential election, right? And for me, there's always been way more juice in the actual, and I mean that juice as in, excitement.
Yeah.
But, there's way more juice in terms of edge on markets like senatorial markets.
Yeah.
To be had. Gubernatorial markets, the lower you get generally in terms of like, okay, there's on the ballot, you might be voting for president, you might be voting for senator, and you're going to be voting for House, right? And the lower down you get, generally the more edge there is.
Of course, just like every market.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, of course. Derivatives are always going to be generally easier to beat than the original market. But like one of my theses is that I'm not saying Kamala is the best candidate ever, right? Like I think she's better than Trump, or should I say perhaps Trump is worse than her, to phrase it like that.
Yeah.
In terms of if you're looking at the lesser of two evils. However, I think that congressional Democrats will generally run ahead of Kamala. That's generally my thesis. So I think that last time I checked the House market, Democrats to win the House, it was probably about a week ago. It's probably going to be very outdated now. But yeah, looking at congressional market and stuff like that, it's much easier to find an edge, in my opinion.
We'll finish off and talk about the US particular election, but Nate Silver is one of the more prominent commentators on it. Obviously runs the website, the 538 website, and gained some notoriety from predicting, was it 2010s? He predicted a couple of elections quite closely, but he is...
2008 or 2012.
One of them. And he's one of the Obamas. He's obviously quite Marmite, Vegemite, to give the Australian term. People, so just looking on today, I think I see Taleb's going in for him and different people. What's your take, not just on him so much, but just in terms of the people commentating on it, the high-profile individuals putting forward opinions and things like that? Is there value or juice to be found in following and listening to people like that? Or again, do you need to apply a filter to kind of understand who actually is an expert and who maybe has an agenda?
I think that it's very easy to sit back and critique someone else's work, and that it's very hard to put your own work out to be critiqued, right? And so some of the problems I've had with Nate Silver in the past, and I'm going to single Nate Silver out here, that's not to say that there are a lot of forecasts worse than him, okay? And there are a lot of methodologies worse than him, but I'm just picking him as an example. So sorry, Nate, but the issue that I've had with Nate Silver is that he puts a lot of really low quality polls into his forecast, and then he does this thing called like a house adjustment. And he effectively, say for example, if a pollster in the past has been more favourable to Democrats, he'll add more to the Republican side. Effectively, what he does is he tries to make good data out of bad polls. And one of the first things you ever learn in statistics class is bad data in, bad result out, right? And even though he said like it wouldn't make much of a difference if you take those out, it says to me, okay, well, if you're doing that wrong, what else are you doing wrong? And he had this whole thing about a post-debate convention bounce and stuff. And it's like, okay, well, this might be right, but I tend not to trust models that don't align with my own thinking. And this might be very arrogant generally, but generally I found that my anticipation, my feel for how an election is going to go is generally correct. And I don't want to sound like a wanker, but generally it's reasonably ballpark, like on average. So if I find something I had Kamala like 60%, while Harris had, Nate Silver had her at 40%. And so I'm thinking, okay, like, come on, this can't be right? But what I will say is that, again, it's hard to put a model out for people to critique. And for people that are uninformed, for people that just want to open up their phones every day, who's winning in the US election, that's a really useful indicator for people that are low info voters. But if you want to bet on the elections yourselves, I would strongly advise not just looking at these top line model forecasts and actually diving into the polls and early voting data a little bit more than what these models do. Like they take this data and they summarize it and they spit it out, blah, blah, blah. But you really have to be looking at the actual poll data yourself.
So just like you put the research in and maybe you look at some of the derivative markets, some of the Senate markets, the gubernatorial markets, and perhaps there are edges there that you can find just by doing it. Just like you might do on horse racing, you might do on cricket, you might do on whatever sport it is that you choose to specialise in. There are edges there. So obviously, I don't want to single out just one person in Nate there, but what about those services or resources or websites or people on Twitter, wherever it might be, the type of people or the resources where you'd advocate, hey, someone's interested in the US election, there's a very liquid market, or where should they go, or what would you recommend to them to get started to educate themselves from that perspective?
I would say that Twitter is a fantastic resource. I would say that it's probably one of the most valuable places of information on the entire internet. Because, yeah, you have a bunch of fucking gimps, right, that post on there. But you also have some of the most smart, the most educated people, the most in-the-know people. for a lot of subjects, including politics, posting their thoughts on there. And so I've said for a long time, knowing who to follow on Twitter is an edge in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to call out specific accounts here because there are some that I want to keep close to my chest. But it would be go onto Twitter for a start and just figure out who's good and who's not. And you can kind of do that pretty easily because what the people who make sense are doing are saying things. Yeah, I'm going to get criticised for this, but are saying things that make sense. Yeah, that's very circular, Zeus. But they're able to explain themselves in ways and make points that you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. The problem is that sometimes partisanship, and by partisanship I mean like how strongly you feel about a particular political side on the spectrum. Like if you're a right wing, do you look at a right wing account saying, yeah, okay. A really good example of this is actually the early voting data in Pennsylvania. There's a guy that summarises this. I would say it, but completely forgotten his right on Twitter. And that's not even me keeping an edge because he's pretty public by now. But you can find it pretty easily if you look. But he kind of summarises, ballots requested, mail ballots and absentee ballots requested by political party because that's public information in Pennsylvania. And then he summarises the returns. And then what he'll do based on, he's an expert in Pennsylvania, done very well in previous elections. He'll say, okay, based on the data that I have right now, I think Democrats have to be ahead by X amount of returns to be considered a favourite in Pennsylvania. And obviously these returns get updated every day except for weekends. So that happens, and he posts something there. But then you also have people posting, and he'll go into detail about this, and you just know sometimes it's hard to know whether he's legit or not unless you've seen him in past election. But you also have a lot of right-wing accounts that will sit there and be like, okay, for example, I don't know whether this original guy that I'm talking about is right-wing or left-wing. I suspect left, but I don't know. But you have some nakedly right-wing accounts going out there being like, this early voting data is absolutely superb for Republicans. And there are a few reasons why you could say that this early voting data might be okay or at best neutral for Democrats, right? And one of them is that just because if people vote early, you don't know about the composition of the actual election day vote. If you have more Democrats voting than Republicans early, say, for example, you might have a really big lead, but who's to say that if you have a total amount of voters, all of them now have voted early? You don't know that, right? Like you can make a guess, but like these right-wing accounts or even some left-wing accounts, but I see it more on the right, don't make arguments like that. It's just like blind random shit, right? And even some very famous, like just kind of like CNN figures and stuff like that have no clue. So a lot of the juice is to be found in finding these really niche accounts where people do really good work and all for free.
Yeah, I've seen that Twitter account. It came up on my feed, and I remember I did a deep dive.
Probably because I retweeted it, yeah.
Yeah, probably Zeus. But no, it was very interesting. You know, it was talking about because you'd think, well, all Democrats vote early, but it was obviously got that baked into how it's presenting the information, and that was really good. But obviously, being able to filter it out and go, okay, what's someone's agenda or not, and then having, I guess, that experience over time as you go through different election cycles and go, well, that guy was talking bollocks because he's, a particular agenda to put forward. So
just to clarify as well, because actually one of the things I wanted to talk about was early voting data.
Yeah.
Like I said, that one of the arguments for that would argue that it's neutral for Democrats is that you don't know how the election day vote's going to go, and I just wanted to explain that because I feel like I didn't explain it well enough. Say you have 2 million Democratic voters after you this is knowing, right? So you say you have 2 million total Democrat voters and you have 2,100,000 Republican voters. You could have 1 million Democrat voters vote early and 500,000 Republican voters vote early, and you would look really good, right? That looks really, really good. But what you don't know is what the composition of election day is. And say, for example, in this case, you have 1 million Democrat voters voting on election day. You have 1,600,000 voting for Republicans, and Republicans win even though that the early voting data looks good. So it's something to take with caution, but I will say right now that I personally think that the early voting data looks good because things like this don't really happen. Like you say it, you got to take it with a caution, but stuff like that, I feel like you can kind of generally read into it a little bit, even though some people disagree.
But also you got the COVID factor, because obviously the last election, that was rampant still and people were encouraged to vote mail-in. So these things to throw into the mix make it a little less certain than perhaps otherwise. And it's interesting, you mentioned the Deep Dive podcast, it was a good episode. And I think one of the hosts there was saying he just thinks it's going to be decided by Pennsylvania. And obviously lots of people say that. So actually having that expertise to go, I'm just going to tell you about mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania as an example of finding information.
Oh, it's superb. And totally for free, right?
Exactly. And you don't have to do it for the presidential election. You can bet into all the specific markets around Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh and Philly and all these places.
Yeah.
So,
and hence one of my biggest bets so far is on Pennsylvania to be won by Dems.
There you go. Straight from the man himself. All right, so that's politics.
Bet responsibly.
Bet responsibly, yeah. Let's get that in. Cricket. You're a cricket punter as well. I know we've got maybe a little bit of time to chat about cricket. Obviously, Australia, cricket's in your blood. Are you still betting extensively on cricket these days with politics, or is it you bet on anything that you can?
No, I definitely am. I've kind of laid tennis off a little bit. I found it's getting harder and harder. Tennis was one of the sports I used to bet.
Yeah.
It's getting harder and harder to beat. I'd rather spend the time on cricket. And I was very lucky to effectively work for probably one of the best cricket prop punters in the world, and I'm not going to name them, but I did a lot of work for them over a period of 2 years. And so I learnt what they do, and I learnt how they operate, and I've taken that into betting prop markets and just generally. Test cricket is generally pretty easy to beat. If you watch cricket, you can kind of figure out it's just about pattern recognition, right? Like, people say this a lot, but if you're watching Test cricket, generally things happen. Like, for example, not to go all Matt Barker on the podcast here, but the draw is generally going to be short, and by short I mean like it's generally priced like way lower than it should be, meaning if you lay the draw or bet against the draw, you're going to get a good value bet out of that. And that's generally true across a lot of markets. And there are other patterns as well. But yeah, I bet a lot of props as well. We all have our weaknesses, and mine is that I think I can beat T20s and I probably can't. And so I bet too much into that, and that's a minus. But yeah, that's kind of my cricket betting journey. I have to try and steel myself into when I'm, had 2 beers on a night out to think I'm thinking in the world and think I can beat T20s.
But obviously, Test cricket has a lot of liquidity in these markets because obviously there's lots of interest in it from the subcontinent. So I know there's cricket trading there's a couple of punters I spoke to recently, some big punters who have moved back to cricket from other sports like racing because of the volume and the edges that are available in that sport. And are you live trading more, or is it pre-game, or what's the mix?
I do both, to be honest, although I do more live now. I have my methods for calculating pre-off stuff, obviously, but when you're watching live, okay, say for example, if you have like a player runs line, right, you're looking at Virat Kohli runs, and historically that, okay, you take all this data, what's the median? I mean, it's more complicated than that. I'm just sort of summing it up. You take all this data, what's the median? Okay, so you have the median might be, and I'm pulling this number out of my ass, it might be 30.5 runs, right? That's the line. Okay, but now what you got to consider is that, okay, well, players perform differently in different places, and I'm not going to say more than that because actually that's probably giving you a decent edge, but not to people that know, but I don't want the general public all listening to this and thinking, yeah, okay, like here's exactly how I'm going to beat cricket. It's still hard, right? But say, for example, the line for Kohli is 30.5, right? Or in your head, you think it is 30.5 after adjusting for a myriad of things. Okay, that pre-game, but you log on, right, and you watch the match, and all of a sudden it's the flattest, the deadest wicket. It looks like, runway 3 at Heathrow. That line has to change, right? I mean, it would, generally. I mean, you can make unders on flat wickets and you can go overs on spicy wickets, but it has to change it relative to what your pre-match is. And same thing, if you're on a wicket that's, spinning around corners, it has to change. And so you get all these extra bits of information when you're betting live that you certainly just don't get pre-match. And it's not to say that pre-matches, you can't beat. You definitely can. But in terms of bang for buck, I generally tend to find that live is better.
Yeah, especially over a 5-day match as the pitch deteriorates. Maybe it starts to take turn. Maybe there's reverse swing. There's all these different elements to bring in.
Correct.
Yeah, interesting. And it would be neglectful of me not to ask you, because when I Googled you, because prep for the podcast, I saw a little story that popped out. Now, I only saw the headline. I've got to be honest, because I get paid to read the full content. But there's something about in 2023, you got kicked out of the Oval.
I can tell you the whole thing if you want.
Go on, tell me. You got kicked out of a test match. Tell me why.
Yes. Okay. So
it wasn't streaking. I'm going to say it wasn't streaking. It was betting.
How long ago did you know about this?
Literally last week when I Googled, I did not know about that until I Googled your name in terms of podcast preparation. And I saw 2 articles, I think, online that referenced your name and in relation to this particular event.
Superb. Okay. So, I mean, it's good that it hasn't permeated that far, but effectively I was in London in 2022 in the summer, and it was the World Test Championship final between Australia and India, and I was just going there with my mate. For those of you who know me on Twitter, you would probably know who that is. I went with him. I'll just call him F, right? Mr. F. And effectively, we were just there. We were legit betting. We weren't sniping. We weren't court-siding on our phones, but we were just betting on the result. We were just, okay, I think Australia will win from here, and we had betfor. For some reason, I don't know how, they found out, they saw that we were betting. Someone in the crowd was like a mole. Eventually, in the third session, right, start of the third session, they come up to us and they're like, gentlemen, can you come with me? And it's like this board, and I'm thinking, fuck, okay. It was a good run, boys. And we get taken upstairs, and bear in mind, we're trashed. We've had like 4 beers. We've had like a bottle of champagne each, and like I'm seeing stars sort of at this point. And I'm just sitting there. Like I said, oh, can I please go to the toilet? He's like, of course, mate, yeah, go. I'm in the toilet. I'm splashing water on my face. I'm just like, okay, so like, Zeus 1, 2, 3, Leo DiCaprio, Wolf of Wall Street, like just snap into it. Anyway, come back from the toilet. He's like, okay, look, you've been found betting on your phones. Do you have anything to say? And I was like,
is that a crime?
Sorry, like what? He's like, yeah, were you betting on your phone? I was like, yeah, I had a bet on my phone, which was, again, me being drunk. If I'd not been, 3 sheets to the wind, I would have shut the fuck up, right? And he was like, okay, we have a strict no ICC policy, strict no betting, blah, blah, we're going to have to kick you out. And I was like, hold on a second. We're not court-siding, right? We're just having a bet. Like, that's legal in this country. You're allowed to bet on a sport. And it is legal. And I want to state that we weren't in trouble with the law here. Apparently, it's just against ICC terms and conditions to bet within the ground.
Right.
So they're within their rights to throw us out, but obviously it's legal. They can't do anything more than that. We're not in trouble with the law. And he's like, look, we understand that you're not court-siding. However, we've decided that you're still betting, and that's technically the terms and conditions breach.
Yeah.
I have a few mates that might get a bit volatile when they're drunk, and some would say something like this. And generally my experience has said, okay, just no problems. The guy was nice about it. I was like, it's third session, whatever. Okay, I'm not going to start a big, hoo-ha right now. So I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, mate, no problems. Can I finish my beer? And the guy looks at me, he's like, yeah, I'll give you 5 minutes. And I had a nearly full beer. I was like, mate, I'll take 3. And so we finish our beers, we go downstairs, we escorted in like the staff elevator, we go out the front and we take that photo, and that's probably you're referencing. And then what happened was, after the game, we were meeting a journalist. We didn't know it was a journalist. We were just having a beer after the game, and this well-known journalist rocked up. He was like, his name was Daniel Sherney. I hope I said his last name right. And he was like, oh, how's the game, blah, blah. We told him the story. He's like, oh, that's a pretty interesting story. Do you mind if we write about that? And I said, of course, no worries. Like, here's my number. Just message me if you have any questions. A few days later, he messages me, tell him the story, gets published. Nothing's ever going to come about it. Like, I understand why they do it. They want to, keep this image. To the wider public, gambling is a dirty word. But yes, that's the story of how I got kicked out of the Oval.
For betting. Wow. I mean, how many people at the Oval that day would have just been betting through their phone apps because everyone's got it on their
it's
phone?
Nuts.
Yeah.
It's absurd. It's
crazy. Absolutely. Well, just reading, Googling, I did not know the detail. I thought, what's going on with this particular story. So it's good to put it out there. There was no streaking involved. Oh, no, seriousness. I've been...
Zero nudity.
I've been to many a cricket game, and I have seen some people completely out of their mind, completely drunk far too much and behaving abhorrently. And they have been chucked out. The threshold to get actually chucked out of the cricket, well, it certainly used to be very, very high. So just to simply sit there, a couple of Aussies, having a few schooners, and then get chucked out for betting on their phone. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? But that's the world we live in right now. Betting's a dirty word.
I mean, look, I've seen someone light up a cigarette at the cricket as I light up another one now. But in Australia, someone lit up a cigarette, absolutely minced, right? Like drunk, absolutely ruined, lights up a cigarette in the middle of the grass bank at the Wacker. And somehow the security doesn't see it. And yet, I have a bet on Australia over something runs and we get escorted out of the venue. And it's like, okay, what are we doing here? I feel like, maybe resources could be better spent, but sometimes you are the canary down the coal mine, is what I've learned.
Yeah, indeed. That's out there now, so people know there was no controversy. So that's good to clear that one up. Zeus, thank you so much for coming on, mate, talking politics, talking cricket, just generally being fun and entertaining and, educational. I've got to ask you two things before we go there. What do you think is going to happen November 5th and what do you want to happen? Whether you want to put forward a personal or just a trading perspective, put it out there and then we can look back and laugh at you or elevate you as the next Nate Silver on November the 6th.
Okay, what I think is going to happen is I think Carmelo is definitely valued right now. However, about 3 weeks ago, I converted 75%. I was green on both sides, blah, 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 trumpet, whatever. I'm a wanker. I'm just cutting those things off at the pass. Had profit on both sides. I lumped, most of the profit onto Trump purely because Florida is one of the fastest counting states on the night. Each state has different ways of counting. Florida just counts very fast. Bless their hearts, right? And so effectively Trump is, I would say, very likely, and when I say very likely, I mean probably in my mind over 90%, probably 95% to win Florida. And I think the markets are going to react quite strongly to that.
Yeah.
And therefore they're going to push Trump down. And to me, there's no reason, since that's happening at the start of the night, why I should be holding Kamala, until that point. So I back Trump there and hopefully lay off. Obviously, he's just down now because of the weight of money anyway. I backed him at 1.9. But in terms of winning, yeah, I think Kamala should do it, but I'm certainly less certain of that now as opposed to a while ago. If I had to give some tips generally in terms of state-by-state markets, I think Pennsylvania is looking good for Democrats. I think Georgia, you can bet at not Georgia, Arizona at 280 or something like that. They have a senatorial election that's, shows a Dem senator at beating the Republican senator by 10%. I don't think the ticket splitting is going to be that big. I would chance the Democrats in Arizona at, I think near $3 they are now, 2-1. There are also some good props in North Carolina to win the governor's race. You can get some margin markets over 10% at decent odds as well. I think I can't quote the odds, but I would say the median result is him to lose by more than 10%, the Republican, because he's been implicated in a lot of scandals. And beyond that, to be honest, I've had to rein in myself a little bit, but generally those are kind of, if I can give 3 bets. Yeah. But I want to say as well, Pete, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and I really appreciate it, the chance to speak my mind, and looking forward to see what people think about this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's been really good to have you on. I've got so many questions. I enjoy political betting. I enjoy that. So it's good to chat about it. Get a sense.
Before you go, do you have any bets yourself?
I took Kamala prior to Biden dropping out. I remember looking at the market going, well, he's probably going to drop out. And I think that was before Trump's assassination attempt, because he was going to, and then I think he seemingly postponed it. I just had a thought I would take a punt on that. So yeah, not certainly not a 6-figure bet, but enough to make me, I think about 9-2, something like that on Kamala. And so I was quite pleased with that. But then I also backed Biden a year ago, and it just tells me don't bet.
As did we all.
Yeah, exactly. And I forgot about it and didn't do anything with it. So yeah, so I'll be cheering here on a big price. So we'll see. Should be an entertaining night, watching the odds move over the course of the evening/morning. And as the votes come in, and
absolutely, I'll be doing my best to live tweet it. We'll see.
I was going to ask you. So you're on X. That's how best people can find you. You're on there. I'll slide the link into the show notes. So is your profile going to be protected, or are you going to loosen?
I will try to keep it public for the night, but I mean, you get a lot of people that just want to slate you for pretty much anything. So depends how we go, but I'll try to keep it unprotected.
Unprotected Zeus. We'll end on that note.
Yeah. Well. But you went there for once, not me. But yeah.
There we go.
Some protection.
No, thanks, mate. Thank you very much for coming on. It's a good chat, and appreciate that. And wish you all the best with, obviously, the upcoming election, and wish you all the best with what you're doing at Shuffle and all your punting. And we'll maybe see you at a test match next year.
Not at the Oval, though.
Not at the Oval. Okay. Cheers, Zeus. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pete. Cheers.